In a very hard choice between either rejecting the agreement and taking on the uncertainty of compelling a return to sanctions and negotiations, or a path that accepts the positives of this deal and attempts to manage and minimize the short and long-term consequences of its flaws, I choose the latter. I will support this agreement and vote against any measures to disapprove it in Congress.
And with that, the president is just one vote shy from protecting one of the most consequential accomplishments of his presidency, the Iran nuclear deal that is right now before Congress. Earlier today, in a speech at the University of Delaware, that was Senator Chris Coons, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, announcing his support for the president's nuclear deal with Iran, becoming the 33rd senator to publicly back the deal. A short time before that, in an 8,000-word explainer, Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania announced his support of the deal, stating, quote, "This was one of the most difficult decisions of my public career. The deal is now just one endorsement away from 34 votes. That's the magic number of votes needed to keep Republicans from killing it." I got a chance to speak with former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, and as someone who served as a special envoy for Middle East peace and for Northern Ireland, I began by asking him how he ranked and evaluated the Iran nuclear deal.
I think this agreement is unique in several respects, and I think, therefore, the president deserves widespread support to gain this agreement's approval and implementation. This is not just the United States and Iran. This is the United States, China, Russia, Britain, France, and Germany, 6 of the largest, most important countries in the world, who negotiated an agreement with Iran, which is desperate for relief from the economic sanctions that are having such a disruptive effect on their economy. That is what's enabled this agreement to come into being. Now, Iran wants relief from the sanctions. The sanctions have been very effective because they are universal sanctions, not unilateral by the U.S. The argument by the president's critics that we should walk away, increase the sanctions, and force Iran to come crawling back is a fantasy, because China and Russia have already made clear they wouldn't agree to continue or increase the sanctions, and neither will the others. So what has happened, and it's interesting, this started under George W. Bush. It was President George W. Bush who began the process to pull together a group of nations that would negotiate from strength with Iran and reach an agreement to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon through diplomacy rather than through war. And that's a crucial point.
Well, having, when you think about, say, Northern Ireland, right? I mean, it strikes me that when you have these high-stakes diplomatic settlements or nonviolent resolutions to conflict, there are always internal domestic political opponents who accuse you of selling out, who accuse you of being weak, who accuse you of appeasing. How familiar does this rhetoric sound to you?
It's very familiar. The opponents of this agreement want to focus the debate entirely on a comparison between this agreement and a theoretically perfect agreement.
Right.
Knowing, of course, that no agreement is perfect, particularly one negotiated over many years by adversaries, as has this one. The real debate, though, has to be, what are the alternatives to this agreement? Because every human being makes decisions in life, individuals and societies. And almost every major decision includes an analysis of what are the alternatives to what is being proposed. And when you look at it in that context, it really isn't even a close call.
Dick Cheney is going to give a speech against the deal. He's been doing interviews now with Liz Cheney. He said that this is going to inaugurate an arms race in the Middle East, this deal. What do you think of that?
I think precisely the opposite is true. If the United States Congress rejects this agreement, an agreement that includes, on our side of the table, 6 of the largest, most important countries in the world, an agreement that has been unanimously approved by the United Nations Security Council members, an agreement that has the support of almost every country in the world that has declared an opinion on it. If the Congress rejects that, Iran will then move aggressively toward weaponization, and that, more than anything, will trigger a nuclear arms race in the Middle East.
You just mentioned almost every country that has expressed an opinion on it. Of course, the major exception to that would be Israel. For many members of Congress, for many citizens, for many interest groups, people say, well, I'm not a nuclear disarmament expert, right? I'm sort of listening to different people, and it carries tremendous weight with me when AIPAC or, both Labor and Likud in Israel say this deal is bad for Israel. What's your response to that as someone who's intimately familiar with the region?
The concern of the government and the people of Israel is a legitimate one. Nuclear-armed Iran poses a direct threat to Israel's existence, and we should keep that in mind at all times. However, when you watch television in this country, no offense to you, three opinions are presented.
Right.
Obama's for it, the Republicans in Congress are against it, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is against it. That omits the fact that there is a substantial body of opposition within Israel against the agreement.
Including former Shin Bet officers, very high-ranking security veterans.
The two most recent heads of Mossad, their CIA equivalent, Ephraim Halevi and Meir Dagan, one of the most respected, iconic intelligence officials there, are strongly in support of the agreement. Now, that doesn't mean they're not worried about Iran.
Right.
They're very worried about Iran, but they think this is the best way to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And there's a fifth opinion. It's the rest of the world. That ought to at least be considered when we consider what to do, because let me tell you, this doesn't mean that Iran won't cheat. This doesn't mean that the possibility of military force to prevent Iran from getting a weapon is off the table. That time may come if Iran foolishly and unwisely tries to cheat on this. But we would then have a far better prospect for organizing an international coalition to take whatever action is necessary, including military force, if we have gone through the agreement and they have been exposed to cheating. Then we will, if an agreement that has such broad support never takes effect because the Congress rejects it.